Hello, all my ceramics friends. Today we are going to make a plate that looks like this. It's going to be about 11 inches wide, and we'll talk about why 11 inches is kind of a magic number for plates. And we're going to start with a ball of clay like this and make my 11-inch plate like this. I'll have about an inch of a rim that's kind of flat. Isn't that nice? And then we are going to take that plate like this, and we're going to trim it so it looks like this. We'll take it from that, and so it has a foot. We'll talk about how to make sure that you have a flat inside, where to locate the foot, right? And all those other cool things. And we're going to do all that right here in one video. All right, so let's get started. All right, so let me move some of this stuff aside. All right, and now we'll take this, and so I like throwing on these plaster bats because they absorb water, and they're just a great thing for making plates, because one of the issues with making plates is that the bottoms dry really slow, and so throwing on a plaster bat really helps because the plaster absorbs water out of the bottom. And so the bottoms will will dry out faster, because plates just in general dry really slow. That's one of the hardest things about plates, is that they dry super slow. So I can add lots of water to this. Also, you don't have to wire these off, and I'll show you that the bottoms are going to end up really smooth already, which is good. And I have to add lots of water to the bottom of the clay so that it will stick to the plaster. All right, so pushing it down, and now we'll center, right? So this is a 4-pound ball of clay that will make my 11-inch plate. And we'll talk about why an 11-inch plate is so important. So why is an 11-inch plate so important? Well, if you get out a ruler and you measure your cabinets, at least here in the United States, the one above the kitchen counters are about 11 inches wide, right? So if you make a 13-inch plate right now, if it's 13 inches on the wheel, it'll be too wide to get into the cabinets above your kitchen counter. You're gonna have to put them below. And so cabinetry in a kitchen can be kind of a valuable space. And so we, at least here, like to put our plates, at least the ones that we use every day, for eating off of, above the kitchen counter. So in the end, your dishes, or at least the dishes that I like to use, need to be smaller than 11 inches. So what I do, just to make sure that they're smaller than 11, is I throw them to be about 11 inches wide now, and then when they shrink during drying and glaze firing and all that, they'll be about the right size, okay? And they'll be smaller than 11, so I know that they'll fit. So they'll probably be 10 inches or a little bit smaller, which is about the right size. So if you really want to be technical about what I'm making today, I'm really making a 10-inch plate, but I always call them 11 inches because that, in my mind, is really what I need to make while they're at the wheel, a little bit bigger than 11. So here it's getting centered, right? Almost there. There we go, going up again. Center, 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 center. All right. Gotta feel so good to be throwing on the wheel. All right, so there. So it's looking pretty centered. So now I have to take this mound and make it into something that will work and be this wide later, right? Because you see how wide that bottom is. Let's just measure how wide this bottom is, right? It is about 8 inches wide. So that this bottom needs to be about 8 inches, but right now this bottom is less than 5. So I need to make this base of this piece here wider. So I need to squash it down. So let's start squashing it down to make it wider. So remember that I started with a 4-pound ball of clay. So how much clay that you need to start with will be different, right? Depending on how big a plate you want, how thick you want it, and all that, how much you want to trim off. All right, so you see how this is starting to do this thing which I call mushrooming. And so what is mushrooming? It's where this side right here is getting wider than what's underneath, which is right here. So what's the danger of mushrooming? Mushrooming isn't the best thing in the world to be happening, because as this side keeps getting wider, so let's just make it worse. Let's make it a bad case of mushrooming. So you see how this piece is starting to fold over, and if I don't do anything about it, I just keep pushing down, this part of here will fold down and hit the bat first before this part does. It'll trap a ring of water or a ring of slip or a ring of air right in the outside here. And then what can happen later is, as my piece is drying, or even after I've trimmed it, I can get a semicircular crack along where that ring was. So I need to make sure that I do not trap air or water or slip in this area underneath by letting this outside part fold down first. So what I'm going to do here is I have water back here. I'm going to add more pressure from this side right here. So you see I'm going to add pressure here and actually force that back down. And I'm adding sideways pressure, but I'm also taking my thumb, this kind of fatty part of my thumb, and actually pushing down at the same time. So I'm pressuring in, but also pushing down at the same time. So I want this part right here to squirt out faster than this part. I don't want this part folding over. And you notice that I'm running my pinky finger here and my ring finger along the edge. And if I can, I'd love to, I don't want my pinky finger to dig in because then I'll catch the clay. I want my pinky finger to be up. So the pressure on my pinky hand and my ring finger are here and here. Those are my pressure points to keep this piece of clay from folding over. So let's just add some pinky pressure there right now, right, to keep it from folding over. So I see I'm pushing that blob back in. And so if I just keep doing that though, everything's going to get taller. So what I have to do is actually use this other hand then to push down at the same time. There we go. So now on the push down, it'll slowly start sliding out. So you see how this finger is still riding along there? See how it got a little wider there? There we go. It's getting wider, looking better. And then I'll do it one more time to get it about the right size. There we go. So even though there you go. Yeah, so that's looking really good. All right. There. All right, so now this, I just know that this is about right for what I want to make. So let's just figure out how big this is, right? So let me scrape some slip off, and then let's just measure it with our handy dandy little ruler. So let's just see how wide is this. This is about 8 inches wide. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, and then let's measure how thick it is. So let's just measure right there, all the way down. Let's measure, and it's about 1 inch wide. So that's good. So that's, for me, is setting myself up perfectly for the kind of plate that I want. And I just know that from experience for the kind of plate that I like, right? When I first started making these, I wasn't measuring them. I just would make one and then try and then make another one and then try until it felt like it was working. And then I finally got on it. So I opened it up just a little bit there, and let's go down and check. So that's getting a little thin, but we can compensate for that, right? So let's bring this guy around. Sorry for the funky direction there for a second. So I like it more from the side for when I'm teaching you guys. So there. So now I'm just going to take this hand. I'm just going to pull straight out here. Right. And I'm going to make this super shallow, a really shallow opening. So let's go right there so you guys can see it just a little bit better. All right. So now you see how I'm starting to open this up, and this little wave of clay starts happening. So I'm going to use my sponge to push this down right here. Okay. Like that, and that helps marry that little wave of clay in. So what I do then is when I pull back, I will actually use both my sponge and my other opposite hand to help pull this back. So let me wet this down, and I'll start pulling back just a little bit. So I'm using this hand to pull back. I'm using this hand to push down. So I'm actually using my opposite hands, right, than what I normally would. So I'm just pushing back and marrying that down. So let's just check the thickness of my clay across here, because I have a really hard time judging my thickness, right? So I always use this just to check across. So that's my thickness. That's pretty good thickness. That's my thickness there. That's a pretty good thickness. So if you want a comparison, that's my pinky right there. It's about pinky thickness. That's what I love. That's about the thickness that I want. So I've already started this, and this area is getting a little bit rough, right? Because of just the way how I open. So I'm going to take my finger here. Sorry for all the camera. I'm trying to get the camera in the right place. Man, getting this one in the right place is hard. All right, so here, I'm going to use this guy here and just start smoothing this out first, right? So I'll do a couple passes. I don't really consider this compression. More like I'm trying to get it even smooth across the bottom right there, okay? And then I'll continue doing my widening, right? So I'm only taking a little bit of clay and widening it across here. All right, you see I'm keeping it married down right there like that. Let's pull this back so you guys get a better view now, because we're out of that area. There we go. So here, I'll pull back. There we go. Look at that, beautiful. So keeping this piece married down, or else that piece of clay will rip off if I don't. So here, I'm just gonna stop again and try to flatten the rest of this out. So I'm actually gonna push some more down here, because it's getting a little bit thicker out there. So here, getting there, push, 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 push. So now I'm going to marry this down, this piece of clay down a little bit better, right? So here, I'm going to push this piece of clay down a little bit just to get it married back down really good. Because that piece of clay might rip off if I don't do anything. Now, you may get a lot of clay coming off in your hands. That is no big deal, right? Just goes into recycling. Okay, and so now let's go back and just check this over really fast. So now I have it made. Now there are lots of ways to make plates. The reason why I teach this way is that it works a lot like the way how I teach my students how to open regularly, right? I'm not trying to teach them something new when they're making plates. We're trying to rely on the skills that we already have. All right, so now I have this and I'll throw this like a cylinder or like a bowl. So when I go, I'm gonna let this flare outward like that, just like how I make a bowl. Now we've got to remember that this piece of clay is much wider than what we usually throw. So I want my wheel speed to be going a little bit slower. If I have like a normal wheel speed, like if I were making a little cup or something, you want a pretty fast wheel speed. As things get wider, you want to slow your wheel speed down. So let's do that. So let's pull this back a little bit further because we're going to get pretty wide here in a second. So here, I'm going to wet this down here. So I'm going to wet this whole thing down. So when I throw, now that it's all wet, I'm going to take my hand here and throw up and out like this. I'll go up and out. So I want to start making it, start flaring it out. So I also here, I've already established a pretty flat bottom here. I just don't want to dig down. Like some people may dig down with their inside hand. You want to just push straight out to continue this floor going out. So let me wet it down again because it started to dry off. So here we go, push. So I'm pushing out and going out and out and out. So I want an even cylinder if I can. So I'm not trying to make it too thin yet. So you see, I want this part here and this part here to be about the same thickness. You see, I got a funny artifact going on there, and that happens because of the way how we open. So we'll mush that artifact back down, remarry it back down again, and then we'll go again. Okay. So here I'm gonna, now it's starting to get like a pretty open thing. So I'm gonna keep throwing because this is just too chunky, right? I'd love it if it was thinner than this. So I'm gonna dig underneath again and throw up and out. Okay. So remember that when we make cylinders, we kind of go straight up, but this one we're trying to make something that's like a plate, right? So we're gonna tip this guy out and then come out like that, right? So cylinder, we go up. I use the same hand position that I do for my cylinder, except the whole operation is tipped over, and I squeeze, and I go out that way. So here, let's wet this down. Let's try a slightly different camera angle so you guys could see it maybe slightly differently. There we go. Ooh, that looks like a good one. Wet everything inside out. So here, throw, pinch, push, push. I'll slow my wheel speed down a little bit more. There we go. There. So I want to hold steady. You have to there's a ton of clay, right, passing through my fingers. So I have to be super steady. There we go. So this is looking pretty good, right? So it's verging, as it gets taller, it becomes like a bowl plate kind of thing. But I am going to push it back down into a plate here in a little bit. So let me wet the whole thing down again. Whole thing down again, inside, outside. But you also have to be aware of how thin this is getting, right? If you look at this isn't that thick anymore. So I got to be careful of how much I try to thin. Now, when I feel up and down here, it's a little bit thicker right in here, a little bit thinner up here. So when I do this last raise, this will probably be the last one, I'm going to try to squeeze just a little bit more here, but I do want to leave some thickness there because when this or if this collapses, it's going to want to collapse right here. That's the place of danger. So I do want to leave a little bit more strength here than up here, right? But for me, I like my rims to have a little bit of strength to them, so I'm not going to thin this rim out too much because I still have to fold this rim down. Okay, so here we go. Wet the whole thing, inside, outside. And then here, we're going to push. Not pushing yet. I'm just kind of feeling it. I haven't really dug yet. There we go. I'm pushing a little bit from the outside. Wet it down again because it dried out. Okay. So now I'll push and then we'll go. So I'm just squeezing just a little bit there at the bottom. Now I realize I'm starting to get thinner, so I'm not really pushing. I'm just kind of doing like a follow through raise. I'm not trying to make that any thinner right there because this whole area up in here is thin enough. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to thin out. Oh, we're done trying to make it taller and wider as far as throwing it thinner. Now what we're going to do is just try to clean up the inside. Now I haven't really done any compression yet. Sometimes I would have already done a little bit of compression, but I generally wait till this step because I already flattened it, right? But I haven't done any compression really on it yet, what I would consider like real compression. So I like to wait till like right now because, you know, I don't want to reach for the rib back and forth as I'm throwing or raising. So you notice I haven't really used any tools other than my sponge, right? So now we'll try to do some, what we would call normally compression. So I'll just take a rib here and just spend some time doing this, right? Always start at the middle-ish, right? And work my way out to the edge, right? Just making sure that's flat and everything. And then now this is where the real fun begins. Well, I'm going to scrape the outside a little bit. So here, what am I doing on the outside? Don't want to hide something from you. I'm just trying to scrape, oops, almost cut the rib. I'm just trying to scrape off some water off the outside, right? I'm just trying to make sure that it's clean. Now, sometimes, right, I'll double rib it. So let's just double rib it. Since here I'll use these two ribs and like opposite sides of each other and push up and push against each other. I'm sorry. So here we go. Push against each other like that and go up, right? So you see that, and then that will help scrape off all the rib, all the juicy stuff off the inside and outside, the slip. Okay, and now let's start kind of getting the shape of the bowl or plate, plate that we want to make. So here we go. So let's do this. So I'm mainly going to do it from the inside. So I'm going to take my rib here and push out from the inside. So here we go. Let's back this one off so you can see it. So this is a little bit hard to film because it's a little bit wider than how my camera is supposed to be set up. Right, so let's do it like that. There we go. So now I'm going to take this here and just push this back. So I'm mainly concerned, like, this plate really has to travel a long ways downward, right? So I have to really push that rim down. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to take this rib and just start slowly pushing this down. Right, so I already know kind of what I want to make. So let's just look at it before we get too excited here, right? Because I already have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to make. So this is what I want to make right here. So this is the kind of plate, the cross section of the plate that I want to make. So it goes flat, 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 flat. We've already established that. It's going to have a little bit of a turn, whoop, and then it's going to have a flat thing here. So I need to be conscious of all those parts. Flat I've already kind of established, right? It's going to have a little bit of a turn up here and then boop, go flat again. So that's what I need to be working towards here. This can become this. It's just right now, this is too tall, okay? So let's try to do that. So I have established the flat part here, right? And now I'm going to start working on this curve right here, and then I'll start working on that, and I'll start working on that, okay? And generally, we kind of work from the inside out, and the last thing we do is fold that rim, that flat 1-inch rim out. So let's make this kind of from the side, because you already have a top view. All right, so now what we're going to do is I'm just going to work this part. Very important for me is how this part transitions from this inside, from the flat part to the turn part. I want it to be a very smooth transition. So here I'm doing my compression, going across here, and I'm going to really focus on that part, how this part turns into there. So now that's looking really good. So now I'm going to start pushing this down to make sure that this is looking good. So I'm really concentrating on this part here, right? Like that. And I'll come back and do that again because that kind of pushing this way and then pushing this way. So when I do this, I push this, I run my rib that way, and then I'll take this and I'll run my rib down that way so that I get a nice even transition between this and this. My rib doesn't have the perfect, for what I want, doesn't have the perfect curve that I can just jam it in there. I love to just run part of it in like that from the flat side, and I'll run part of it down from the curve side, and then somewhere along in here, it will get the curve that I want. So it's looking pretty good. So it still looks like a bowl. I really need to push this down still. So let's now work on pushing it down. So here is just too much rimminess. So it has a lot of juice. If you look here, there's a lot of goop still on my rim. So I'm going to degoopify that by doing this. And I'm just going to use a piece of plastic and wrap it. So this will help round my rim. Look how much just came off. I forgot to do that step earlier. Should have done it earlier. So this will round my rim off. Now I might have to cut my rim off later, but at least there's a chance that I might be okay with the rim that I just established there. All right, so let's find a good spot for that. There, we're in focus. So now let's go and start folding this guy down. So I'm gonna switch to this bigger rib for this. So this big green one. And I just like these bigger green ones. Now, I don't want to use the big green in this here because it's just too big to flatten out this area. See, it reaches past that spot. But here, I could keep using it here like that. Oh, that's doing really good. So now I'm going to start using this to fold it down. So you can kind of see here that I've kind of hinted at where my rim's going to be, but this part isn't long enough here. This flat part isn't long enough. So I have this part established now, and I'm pretty happy with that curve. Now I'm going to fold the rim down. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I'm going to take a very flat part of this curve and see if I can push this down. This right here. See, I kind of push that down. So anywhere along the way, I could stop. I could stop here and say, hey, that's looking pretty good. But for me, I'm just going to keep laying it down. So now that you saw how that's done, let's get a lower view to see if we can get a good look at how it changes as I push it down. So for me, this has some verticalness right here going this way. So this would be good for something like spaghetti or something that you want, let's say you're going to pile it on, and it will, if it's the plate is too flat, it would kind of and spill out because it might have some sauciness with it, right? So this is a good kind of plate, but then it has like maybe an inch. It goes like an inch vertical here, so that the stuff that you pile in won't spill out. So you could stop here and be very cool with that. Let's make something really flat, like something like a steak or something, because if you have a plate this tall and you're trying to use a knife on that edge of that rim will keep you from getting that knife flat enough to really cut through the last little bit of that steak. So let's lay this rim down really flat. So I'm just going to keep using this rib here and pushing it down, right? And every step along the way I can stop and say, hey, that's good. But in this case, we're just going to keep pushing this rim down. You see that? How that rim is now getting a little bigger and a little wider and more substantial. So what does that mean? When we make a rim wider, what does that really do? Well, the way I think about it is the rim is really the frame for the food, right? So I put my food in there, pretend like, ooh, that's a beautiful piece of food, right, in the middle of my plate. This rim doesn't really do much as far as make more usable surface for me to eat out of. In fact, as I make this rim bigger, that kind of usable part, right, the part that you can put your food in and eat out of and stuff, really actually gets smaller and smaller. So the way to think about your rim is you can think about it as a frame for your food, right? So when I'm already starting to think about how I'm going to glaze this. This is my eating surface up to that line right there. This is my frame. I can add like a different color glaze, put an oxide on there, do some graffito or mishima on there. I can do any sort of decorating technique, right? And generally the food will stay here, and then this will still be what I call the frame, like the picture frame for your food, and it'll be awesome. So this actually plate is turning out a little bit different, right? So this rim is turning out way bigger than the other one. That's okay. So now I'm almost there and here. So we're just going to fold this down just a little bit more. There we go. So you see how so the folding down the rim is the last thing you do. If you notice that I was using this curve part, because it's actually, the rim is stronger if it has a little bit of a curve up, this part. If this part here curves up a little bit to the outside, and then at the last minute, I'm going to flatten it out with this part here. So coax it down, go slow. You see how I'm supporting it here a little bit? I'm not really supporting. What I'm doing is, as I push down with my rib, this hand here acts kind of like another set of eyes, because when this is pushing down, I can't really tell what the clay is really doing. I don't have fingertips here to feel how the clay is really pushing back. So if I put my fingers here and they drag a little bit, that allows me to see if the clay is starting to sag or what's starting to happen. You cannot go past halfway here. So we're going to pull that up just a tad. That's as far as I can lay it down. Now, in general, for me, these rims have a tendency, as they're drying, to pop back up. Why is that happening? A lot of times that's happening because the rims dry first and they shrink a little. And so as they shrink, they go whoop and they stand up just a little bit. And then the rest of the pot dries out, but the rim kind of stays kind of up in the air. So that's what happens. So I like to flatten these out a little bit past what I want, and then I expect them to dry and pop up. So that is looking really good. So if you look at the inside and outside of this plate, right, it's pretty smooth coming into here, has that turn up, and then it has my beautiful flat rim. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to decorate that. A lot of times, because you folded this out so far, you want to take maybe this guy and see how the rim maybe doesn't look perfect. I want to circleize that, make it look really good. I will take my needle tool, hold it like a pencil. This time I'm doing it lefty, right? And I use my right hand to support underneath. And I'll just slowly drag that needle tool all the way around, right? And then each revolution, I push it down just a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper till I get all the way through. I stay in the same line. So I'm through all the way around, and then it comes off. And then you end up with, woo, a perfectly round plate. Woo, 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 woo. And then I'm going to soften that line just a little bit. So that's the last thing that you do is round and then finish the rim. So you saw me with my, with my piece of plastic for rounding rims. I'm going to re-wet this, and I'll use my chamois for this one. Piece of plastic works great. I could do that for everything, but just to switch it up, we're going to use the chamois. I wetted the rim down with my sponge, and then here we're just going to round this baby up, right? Because I want this rim to look as good as it can right now, right? Remember that it had a little bit of wobble. You see how that wobble is all gone, right? And making a beautiful plate is such a good experience, right? It makes things. So here I'm just flattening out. There's sometimes when you push down, you create a little fold or something underneath. I'm just straightening that out. So let's take a look from the side. Ooh, look at that. That's looking really good and happy, right? So you see how flat it is. That's looking like a really fun and good plate. All right, so now with these plaster bats, I do have to undercut it, so you have to get really low for this to see the undercut. And I'm not going to really cut any clay off. I'm just going to try to use this point and just try to stick it way down there just to provide an undercut against there. If you don't do this, the plates won't come off, right? Anything won't come off. So you see how I put a little groove down there? So that means when the plate starts to dry, it'll pop off the bat. Super easy. So let's take a good look at this from the side. It's looking really good, right? So that's the plate that I made. All right, so let's trim one. Let me put this here. All right, so when I trim, I like to use, so what are we gonna do when we trim? So this is how it looks right now on the bat. So I made these a couple of days ago, right? So it looks like that. This one has already come off. Look how smooth that bottom is, right? And I've been handling this a little bit, so that all the extra stuff is stuff that because I set it down on other clay, but that's how it looks. There's some thickness there. Let's look at what we're gonna do when we trim this. So here I have the one that's already trimmed. Look at that. So you can see that I want to ideally, so you see how that's the inside rim and it dips down and it goes flat across, it comes back up. What I want to do ideally is trim this outside so that it parallels the inside, about the same thickness all the way through, right? So that's what we're going to do from this, right? And then this is the theory that you can see that there I've drawn some lines, right? So that part we're going to remove, that part in there we're going to remove, and then that part there. And then the foot we locate, or at least I like to locate my foot opposite where the flat part ends and the curved part stops. You see that? Flat, see right there? I locate it opposite. So on this guy, on this guy, I would locate the foot right like there. You see that? And you see how I put my fingers on both sides? Because that's how I try to locate my foot. What do I mean by that? Well, let's bring one out and let's trim it, and I'll show you. So here I have one that I'm going to trim for you, right? Same plate that of those other ones. So here what I do is I put my finger where that transition starts. Inside flat part stops and the curve starts. And I'll put this one here, and I'll use both fingers on both sides. You see how they're trying to match up? And then on the outside one, I'll just dig my fingernail in right on the opposite side of that finger. That's about where I'm going to put my my foot. All right, so let's pull this bat off. There's one other thing. Sometimes this isn't quite flat, so sometimes you may want to trim the inside. So let's just do that just to show you as an example of what's going on here. So you gotta get that off and put a bat down. I always like trimming on a bat. So I had a bat here. Let's see if we can get another one out for you guys. Really wedged in there. Here's the bat. So here we're gonna get this bat out and we're gonna put this guy down. So now what I'm gonna do is actually sometimes the bottom of these aren't flat. So let's talk about that. I can trim the inside of these really easy. So I'm going to center this up and then we'll trim the bottom. Because sometimes you don't get it flat. So as you get better, you'll get these plates to be super flat. But sometimes in the beginning, your plates don't start off flat. They're a little bit like low, high, low. We can trim some of that out. So let's just do that as part of this lesson today. So I centered it up, and now I'm going to add some clay way down in here underneath the foot to keep it from sliding around and hold it in center. So here, sorry you can't see it. We'll do one here on the other side so you guys can see it. So here I slide this clay way deep underneath there in the shadowlands, right there. You see that? And I push it up against the side and I push down there. So it is perfectly okay to trim the insides. Is it the best thing to be doing? Well, no, because it slows you down, right? It'd be better if you get it every single time, right? But at the beginning, you're not probably going to get it as flat as you want it. Don't panic. It's better to probably just get it as flat as you can, and then you can trim it out. So the reason why we can trim out plates is because these plates are really open, right? And it's easy to get this stuff out when we trim it. So it's a little bit lower here for me and a little bit higher here for me. So I'm going to use my trimming tool and not trim here. I'm mainly going to trim this part out here. So like that. So don't worry, at the beginning you'll probably have some where you might have to do some trimming, but you see how easy it is for me to trim it and then get those trimming scraps out of there, right? Where a bowl is really hard to trim on the inside, where these plates, easy, easy, easy. So why not trim them, right? Especially at the beginning so that they look a little better. So that's getting there. It's almost flat. This one was way off. So I have an issue. I think it's because I'm stigmatic. My eyes can't see when something's flat. So there. So that's feeling pretty good. So I'm going to use the flat end of this to trim that flat, to clean it up a little. And then don't worry, I'll clean out this line that I made here in a second. So now I'm going to use the fat end of this guy here to trim this curve back in, right? So we're almost done with the trimming. Right, so now if you look closely, there's still, no matter how good I do, there's still a little bit of trimming lines there. It's hard to fix that with this. So then I'll come back with it with this rib here and use this rib like a trimming tool. So I'm going to bend it a little. See, I put a bend. I'm going to use the curve side downward, right? Curve side down. And I'll try to hold it up at a 90-degree angle and use it like a trimming tool almost. I'll go across that surface and trim off all the high spots. So here we'll do it with two hands. There we go. Let's pull this camera back here so maybe you guys can see how it's trimming right there. So here we go. I'll try to do it one-handed so you guys can see the trimming coming up. There we go. There, you see how that's trimming off? Oh, caught the edge. So you see how that's starting to look better and that's feeling flatter. And then I'll do this curve right here, this part of that curve right there by using this round part right here and push it in there. And just be super light with it. Just trying to, so you can see the light lines are the parts that are getting trimmed off. The dark lines are the places that I haven't gotten to trimming yet. Because I want it super smooth. For me, I like having these insides super smooth and beautiful. Now, do I do this with all my plates? It's usually not, right? I usually don't have to do this. But at the beginning, when I was learning, I'd have to do this a lot, just because how do you learn how to make something flat? Well, you got to make a lot of non-flat things really first. And then like this big, a flat surface is hard to get, right? And if I'm making something really big and flat, like a giant plate, I usually have to trim it a little bit because I want this to be a nice, beautiful surface. This is really the show surface, right? For the pottery. There we go. So now what do? I want to now smooth it out because it looks trimmed on the inside. So I'm just cleaning up some of the trimming scraps there. So now I want to clean this up to make it look smooth. So I can wet it down just a little bit. So I take a little bit of water on my sponge, squeeze it almost all out. And then what I'm doing is I'm just going to run this around, kind of just dampen that surface a little bit. And then I'm going to hold this rib flat like this. So you let it go flat. And I could use this rib now to polish this surface up, to kind of tighten up those the surface again. Kind of giving it like a quick burnish. And then hopefully the idea would be that you can't really tell that it ever was trimmed out a little bit. That would be the ideal situation. Now, the most ideal situation, right, is to not have to do this at all. But every once in a while, you got to do it. So I wanted to teach you guys how to do it. Because otherwise, you'll just be stuck with these plates. So, ooh, that's feeling really smooth and good. All right, so inside's done. Let's do the outside and trim the outside. So here, let's just lift that off. And I'll pull these off. So now, when I do this outside, I always trim on one of these bats. So why is that? Well, that's because the bats will allow me to pick up my plate when I'm done. Because sometimes if you're trimming your plates and they're a little bit wet, they're going to, whoa, my camera. Sometimes your plates, if they're a little bit wet, when you trim them, they're going to end up so that you can't pick them up without a bat. And if you don't trim on a bat, then they'll warp when you pick them up. So I always trim my plates on a bat like that. I'm the tap center. If you want to see the lesson on tap centering, check it out. It's on my YouTube channel, actually. So here, so there, ooh, that was good, tap centered. All right, so a couple tricks with this, right? I'm going to put this clay down here like that. The thing that you want to watch out for is, since this has a nice flat rim, I want to make sure that this piece of clay is sitting on the outside of that rim, and I push down like this, right? What you can run into problems with, let's say you have a bigger piece of clay like this, if that piece of clay is sitting on top of the rim like that, so you see how this piece of clay, and you push down up here, you're going to break your rim because you're putting pressure on your rim, right? You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that the clay that you're using to hold down your plate is sitting on the outside of the plate, especially when it has a flat rim, and then pushing down around the outside like that to stick it down. Okay. All right, so here we go. So that's my fingernail mark. That's where I want to put my foot. I'm just going to put the mark on there. Let's see here. Line my needle tool up and mark it. Let's see if I can get that right. There we go, right there. There, so that's the mark where it should be. That will probably be the inside of the foot, and then the rest of this clay, right, we will trim away. So I've just put this mark down, right? So that's that mark, and then I'm going to trim out the rest of this clay. So I'm going to trim out that part, trim out all that inside, and trim out that part there. Inside and outside, right, being parallel to each other all the way around, so that we end up with something like that. Woohoo, that's the idea. All right, so we could use the handy dandy Sureform because we have a lot of clay we have to knock off here. So let's use our handy dandy Sureform tool and then just trim this away. There you go, you can see it. There we go. So you see how that does a great job of just whacking the clay off. It's great. This is the Michael Sherrill one, the Mud Tools one. It's great. Absolutely, positively a great tool. This is a tool that's good for both hand building and throwing. Does both things super well, mainly for just cheese grating off clay like that. Oh, this clay also makes fabulous slip. If you need to make slip in a big hurry, I just save some of that, and then because it's already grated up so small. Let's just get a shot of that in action. Let's see here if we can get a... There you go. So you see how that's working right there. Nice. So that's just grating off that huge chunk of clay that was sitting on the outside of that. There we go. So I'm to that line. I don't want to go past that line for that. Now I'm going to get ready to do my trimming, my regular trimming. So now I have to think about, that's the outside of my foot. That'll be the inside of my foot. Let's break out one of these tools. So I use this tool for trimming. I'm actually going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to trim a little bit wider. We'll explain why here in a second. So you see how I'm going a little bit wide of that mark, and I want to leave some extra clay because I want to do something fun with this foot. So what I'm trying to do is trim this level down now so that this level here is parallel here. So that I want to trim this part vertically downward so that this thickness to there is about the same thickness as all the rest of the clay. So here I'm trimming that down. Now this tool now cannot do any rest of this because you see how it's too long. It doesn't really fit in this space. You see that? And then I don't want to trim any more off here, but I'll trim down here and up here. So I got to switch to another tool. I love using that tool, but I have to switch to a smaller one. So here I'm going to switch to this tool here and let's just keep this close up while you guys can watch me trim. So here, There we go. So I'm just going to switch to this tool and knock the part of this down because there's just too much clay here. And I'm just going to create this sort of roundness right here because this needs some roundness here. See how this is just a little bit round right here? It creates some roundness as it transitions from this flat rim to there, right? There we go. So I'm using that tool. I'm just rounding that little hump off, right? So that's looking close, right? It's a little rough, but we'll come back and fix that. There we go. So that's looking really good now. Now we're going to come back and trim this inner foot right now, right here. So we'll trim this foot out here a little bit. So I'll start in the middle here and trim this out. So this is the part where if your clay is really wet, this is the part that will give you problems because this will start to collapse. So you got to wait till these are really leather hard because this is such a wide horizontal space. If your clay is wet, sometimes this will bow downwards like that, go from flat and bow down. So you got to really wait till these are leather hard. But that's the reason why these hydro bats work so well, is because they dry out these bottoms really nice. So I have some hydro bats that are like 18 inches wide. They're great for making platters. There we go. Look at that. Yeah, good, good. So start from the middle, go out. There we go. Start from the middle, go out. There we go. Looking good. All right. So I always have to take a straight edge and just see how much space I have. So I don't have enough space yet. So I'm going to keep trimming. It's hard for me to see if this is flat. Remember, I was talking about how I'm a little bit stigmatic. It's kind of hard for me to see what's going on here. So everything looks curved to me. Even straight lines always look a little bit curved. It could be just a function of my glasses, but I do have some stigmatism. So everything, and so my glasses are trying to compensate for that. So yeah, it all depends on how I see it. So that's looking much better, but it's still, you see how this outside is much lower than the inside. I want to trim this inside so it's close to about the same depth. You see that? So that this here and this here are about the same depth. You see that on this one? So this inside still needs to be trimmed out some more. Trim, 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 trimmy, trim, trim, trimmy, trim, trim. Oh, that was a nice that was a lot of clay right there. That was nice. All right, so I'm starting to get close. Like this still needs to trim down a little bit, but I'm getting close. So I'm going to switch to a bigger trimming tool, a nice bigger flatter one. And so here this is the time when I love using these big flat blades right here for trimming. Because this now when it trims will end up being nice and beautiful. Because since I'm getting so close, right, I might get to one point and say, oh, that's it. And then I want this to already look good, right? So you see, I'm just basically spending some time cleaning that up. Let's get my straight edge back out and let's take a look at how thick it is. That's looking better, right? Let's get a nice downward look at that. That's looking pretty good. You see that? That's looking pretty good. And then you see how this edge and this edge are starting to line up a little bit better. This inside, that outside they look a little like they line up. I think this needs to be trimmed off just a little bit more. So let's do that. Ooh, I like that view. That's beautiful. Look at that. That is really nice. Nice. All right. So I think that's looking good. I think it's just a little bit more now that I'm just looking at it here. There we go. There. There. So now let's clean up the inside. Now I'm going to come back with this and clean up this inside edge. You see how this edge looks just a little bit, doesn't look very polished. Like this part's looking pretty good. So I'll come back with this tool here and just trim that inside edge, square it up really good. This looks like it's bouncing up and down because I haven't leveled this area yet. So I'll come back and do that right now. So I want to level this off. So, well, no, let's come back and finish this. So this isn't quite thin enough. So we'll thin that out just a little bit. There we go. Beautiful. Look at that. Nice. So it's like I'm not a huge plate maker, but man, when I make them, I have a really good time. So let's level this part off here. So I'm trimming more off one side than the other, just so I can get this foot nice and leveled off. Wow, that's really off level. There, better. There. So now we'll come back and now round it up because something happened there when I was leveling. There we go. Looking much better. All right, so I'm going to come back and use, since I had to do so much work there, I'm going to come back and use this. So usually I'd be very close to done. So I'm coming back here and just re-leveling that out. There we go. Woohoo, that's looking much better. So remember, I left this thick here for a reason, and I'm going to come back, and this gives me some room to make kind of a more sculptural foot. Rather than having a foot that comes straight out, let's put a foot on here that looks like this. You see how this foot, rather than come straight out, has a little scoop, whoop, put in there. So let's look at the other side, right? You can see how there's a little bit of a negative scoop, right? Come on, focus. You see a little bit of negative scoop, and it creates this very interesting, more kind of pedestal looking foot. I like that for these sort of plates. So let's talk about how we make those. So I need my special tool. I have this tool here that has a rounded end, right? And I could also do it with this guy here. So let's just do it with this guy here. I'm just going to use the heel of this rounded end and just stick it in there to create that. So you see how this foot is right now, it's just too thick for how big this plate is. I left it thick so I can trim this foot on there. So I'm going to take the end of this tool here, this rounded end, and just start trimming, using that to trim the shape in that I want. There we go. So you see that how it has like this whoop, and then it has that area there. Now that is okay, but I like using this one just a little bit better. Oh, I just had it in my hand. This one has, this is the tool that I normally use. This is a Dolan tool, and just has, instead of having the square end, it has a rounded end. You see that? Square end, rounded end. So I'll use this rounded end instead. And I just like how tight and beautiful this curve is. This tool is always nice and sharp because this is all I ever use it for. Really, I use it for a few other things. Oh, look at that. Just that little bit of more negative space. Woo, just looks so good. I just love it. Right, so now we're going to come back and clean up these trim marks here with I lost it. We'll try it with this guy. Oh, there it is. With this guy here. So now I'm just going to do some light duty trimming here. The reason why I didn't clean it up before is because sometimes I need to make some changes here, but it's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to come back and lightly just trim off all those marks. There we go. I'm going to trim off some of these marks here. Come back into there. Ooh, that's looking really good. So there, woohoo, that's looking good. So now I'll round off my foot. You know, I want a nice rounded end foot. You see how the end of this foot right here is beautifully rounded. It's not sharpie corner. And that just makes your foot a lot stronger and tougher to withstand the punishment of setting it up, like picking it up, setting it down on the table, things like that. So you see I'm rounding this end. Let's get a really close-up view of what I'm doing here. Wow. Get a close-up view. Come on, camera. Right, so here I'm just going to round this end here. I'm just rolling that, and I'm going to trim this off right there. Let's clean that off, see how it looks. Ooh, that's looking really good. Nice. So then I'll come back with a metal rib, or this one's a little bit soft, so I might be able to get by with a rubber rib and see if we can just round this and round it off, make it look polished. So this part right here will be the only part that will be unglazed when I'm done. So let me clean off some of this trimming stuff because I don't want any of that trimming stuff in this. Because if I leave any of that trimming stuff there, sorry, I have to retrim this because I just put all these marks on there by dropping this tool on there. There we go. So let's just round this off by pushing down here. There we go. So that's looking nice and happy and round. I got a little bit, we're just going to leave that garbage in there for now. It'll pick out, we'll be able to get it out later. So I think we're done. Let's take a look. Oh, let's take a look. Let's flip it over. Let's get this camera farther away from us now so that we can get a good view of how it looks. All right, look at that. Ooh, look at that plate. So inside was flattened. And then I trimmed the outside. So, all right, thanks a lot, everyone.